Mentre viene impostata la nuova presentazione, lasciatemi presentare una carissima persona, il dottor Reid. Io lo seguo da 15 anni, l'ho scoperto tanti anni fa su internet, avevo visto qualche pubblicazione sua. Lui è il fondatore della cimatica. Io ho voluto fortemente che lui venisse qui perché lui è stato la persona che è riuscita a dare forma al suono, ed essendo io musicista, per me è stata una cosa meravigliosa poter vedere come i suoni prendono forma creativa. E devo dirvi che lui ha fatto molto di più, perché lui non solo ha dato forma e colore ai suoni, ha fatto delle ricerche insieme al maestro Mitchell e a tanti altri fisici acustici. Lui è un fisico acustico, un inventore, uno sperimentatore che gira tutto il mondo adesso per presentare questi contenuti così tanto importanti, ma lui adesso ha fatto delle ricerche su come il suono guarisce, misurando come la musicoterapia ha effetti straordinariamente terapeutici. Vi lascio nelle sue mani, godetevelo tutto perché è straordinario. Grazie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. I'd like to begin by thanking you all for coming. You know, you could have been sitting at home today, watching the television, or resting, or relaxing, or being with your family, or meditating, but you chose to come here and to learn some new knowledge. I'm a little sad to see that not every seat is filled, but that makes your role even more important, because when you leave here today, you'll be able to share the knowledge that so many of these wonderful presenters have shared with you. So give yourself a big round of applause, please. I'd also like to thank Lorena and Dario and the Dharma Italia organization for this wonderful conference, and also for all the volunteers who helped. And I'm including in the volunteers the wonderful interpreters headed by Bruno. You know, when Lorena invited me to speak, the only other conference that I have been to that was in a foreign language, Italian in this case, the interpreter was so slow that I had to say a sentence and then wait, da-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da, and then say another sentence and wait, da-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da. But when I heard how wonderful Bruno and his expert interpreters are, I realized that all of the notes that I had written for this lecture that I thought I was going to have to read, we can now throw the notes away. And now I can speak at my normal pace. In fact, these are my only notes now, written on a napkin. I'd like to start with a quotation from Einstein, a paraphrased quotation. You remember this quote? It's a wonderful quote that says that if someone is trying to explain something, if a child cannot understand it, then the explanation is not a good one. So my hope for you today is that when I explain this new science of cymatics, that you will leave here with some new knowledge and that I have not confused you. So last evening, those of you who were here for Stuart Mitchell's wonderful concert, you will know that he talked a little bit about the Roslin cubes and how these strange patterns are embedded in stone. It's music embedded in stone in this famous chapel in the city of Edinburgh where Stuart Mitchell lives. Well, he also mentioned that the science of this cymatics goes back 500 years. So let me begin by giving you a very quick overview of cymatics so that you have a foundation to work from when I actually start my presentation, which I have not started yet. So, Leonardo da Vinci, 500 years ago, he had a very dusty house. And one day he rose from his table and the table vibrated. And he noticed that on the surface of the table were some little particles of dust. And as he vibrated the dust, they formed into a beautiful pattern on the table. This is in his notebooks, in one of his notebooks. This is sound made visible. Vibration organizes matter and takes it into a structure. This is happening all around you all the time. You cannot see it, but it is happening. And I will explain a little bit more as we go along. A little later in history, another famous scientist, Galileo Galilei, was walking by a blacksmith shop one day, and he saw the blacksmith hammering on an anvil, and he saw little bits of metal being organized by the sound. And again, this is recorded in Galileo Galilei's notebooks. So you see, the science of cymatics has a very long and illustrious beginning. So, let me begin the presentation. Sounds that heal cells. Let's begin by winding the clock back to 1996. So, 20 years ago. 20 years ago, my daddy and I were in Egypt. And we visited, like many tourists, we visited the Great Pyramid. I was a little bit naughty because I wanted very much to lie in the sarcophagus, you know, this 3.7-ton granite box that has been hollowed out. I wanted to make sound. Of course I wanted to make sound in the sarcophagus. I'm an acoustics engineer scientist. So, go back one. There's a delay. There we are. So I'm lying in the sarcophagus making sound, and my daddy is standing by. And what I'm doing is I'm making a glissando. Do you know what a glissando is? I'm sure those of you who are musicians will know. Let me give you a very quick demonstration. Excuse me. That's a kind of glissando. I'm changing the frequency of my voice. If you do this at home in your own bathroom, if you close your eyes and focus on your ears, you will hear one frequency from your vocal apparatus that seems to be louder to your hearing than any other frequency. I suggest when you do this that you close the window so that your neighbors do not think you're crazy. Anyway, I did this in the sarcophagus, and at one particular frequency, my whole body tingled from my head to my toes. I was very excited by this. I had never experienced anything like this before. I knew in that moment that I must go back to the pyramid with some proper acoustics instrumentation to do a whole series of acoustic tests to find out, to investigate the sarcophagus. What is it about the sarcophagus that has this amazing effect where I make my own sound with my own voice and my whole body tingles? Okay, so what happened was I made arrangements with the Egyptian Antiquities Department to go to Egypt a few months later, armed with lots of acoustics equipment. I prepared everything, I rehearsed everything, and then about 3 weeks before I was due to fly to Egypt, I hurt my lower back. Very, very badly, and I was in a lot of pain. I was in so much pain that I didn't think I'd be able to travel to Egypt to carry out the research, and I had paid a lot of money to do this research. But I was a brave boy, and I took some painkillers, and I went to Egypt. So obviously I could not carry the heavy equipment in. Other people had to carry the equipment, and here you see one of the Egyptian helpers bringing in one of the very big suitcases full of equipment. And here you see a somewhat younger version of myself. Yes, what 20 years can do. I'm standing a little bit awkwardly. Do you notice? My back is in a lot of pain. Anyway, the antiquities inspector helped me to set up the equipment. What I was particularly interested in was the resonances in that granite sarcophagus. You know, when you strike the side of the sarcophagus with your fist, it rings like a low-pitched bell. So, the experiment that I wanted to carry out was quite a difficult one to set up. It involved stretching a membrane across the surface of the sarcophagus. This is a PVC membrane, and on this membrane I would sprinkle some sand, and the whole plan was to see what resonances could be made visible in the sarcophagus. So, to begin with, I put a loudspeaker in the bottom of the sarcophagus, as you can see. And then we stretched the membrane across the top. And we needed sand to weight the membrane all the way around the perimeter. Well, there's no shortage of sand in Egypt. There's one of the Gaffirs collecting sand outside the pyramid. They've got any amount of sand in Egypt. So what happened was very strange. After we set the equipment up, the antiquities inspector, he moved to the side, and he was kind of filing his nails and looking very bored and probably thinking, this Englishman is a little bit crazy. But remember, I had paid quite a lot of money, so it probably didn't care. The first thing that happened was we got this strange ocean of shapes that appeared on the sarcophagus. There you see them. You can see around the, you can see here, these are some of the little bags of sand that are going around the perimeter. So initially the antiquities inspector is looking across and he's seeing these strange shapes, and then something astonishing happened. I changed the frequency on the signal generator just a little bit, and suddenly the ocean of strange shapes vanished to be replaced by an ancient Egyptian hieroglyph. You can imagine my excitement and surprise. The antiquities inspector, he rushed across. How you do that? How you do that? Is what he said. I just shrugged my shoulders. I had no idea that we would see ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus. None, no idea. And then he was, okay, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? So in that moment, we became a team. He was helping me to carry out the experiment. I changed the frequency, and another hieroglyph appeared. This is called the SAR loop. It is a symbol for protection. I changed the frequency, and another hieroglyph appeared. And I changed the frequency, and another hieroglyph appeared, and so on. Many hieroglyphs appeared on the surface of the sarcophagus. Well, you can imagine I was very excited. And so was the antiquities inspector. But something else very important. All the pain in my back had left me. No pain. So in that moment, I thought, this is endorphins. I'm excited, I'm happy, these amazing things have happened. And in my bloodstream, we have endorphins, and that is masking the pain. And when I get outside the pyramid, all the pain will come back, and I will be in agony again. But the truth is, the pain never came back. So how is this? Well, one of the little tests that I had done before setting up the membrane on the sarcophagus is called a white noise test. Some of you may know what a white noise test is. It sounds a bit like the ocean or a waterfall. It's a noise, just a noise. But in theory, it's every frequency of sound, right across the whole of the audio spectrum. And when you put this white noise into a room, say like this room, and you look on a spectrum analyzer, you can see the profile, the acoustic profile of the room, and that's what I was interested in doing before I set up the cymatic experiment. So please remember that, because we'll be coming back to it a little bit later. It's very important. Let us move on now to the organizing principle of sound. You saw on the sarcophagus that sound can organize matter into specific shapes. In that case, ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. But one of the mainstream models of cosmology is that sound organized the early universe. You know the religious text, in the beginning was the Word. Well, it turns out, according to this model of cosmology, that there is more than a grain of truth in that statement. Because, according to this model, the sound of the Big Bang caused matter to clump together in some areas and to be less dense in other areas. And when you look at this picture of the sky, this is only one small part of the sky. You can see a group of galaxies here, a group of galaxies here, a group of galaxies here, and here. And can you see that there's a definite arrangement here? This is a structure. So the structure was caused, according to this model, by the sound in the early universe. After about 1 million years, the sound became not as potent as other forces such as gravity, and gravity then took over. But sound, according to that model, is why when you look at the sky with a powerful telescope, you see definite structure in the position of the galaxies. Changing the subject a little, let's ask this important question. How did life begin? Well, of course, no one actually knows the answer to that. But I'm going to show you some slides now that I think will give you some insights. Because if we understood how life began, we would have some clues as to how to heal life. I'm sure many of you will know this famous experiment conducted by Dr. Stanley Miller. It's known as the Stanley... Oh, my voice has gone very high-pitched. It's known as the Stanley Miller-Urey experiment. Then you can look it up online in Wikipedia. What Stanley Miller did, it's a seminal experiment. He took some water, he put it in a flask, in this flask. He put some of the gases that would have been present in the early Earth, such as methane gas and hydrogen gas. He put those into the flask. And then you see these electrodes here. These create sparks from a high voltage generator. He sparked the atmosphere in the water. And what he found after 1 week, when he took the liquid from the flask, he found in the water some simple amino acids and some simple sugars. That's a very impressive experiment. So one of the mainstream models of how did life begin on Earth is obviously in the oceans, and that lightning played a part. But I want to ask you this question. Lightning, you would think that lightning was a destructive power, not a constructive power. And even if we accept that the lightning, or these little sparks, was the prime mover in creating the amino acids and the sugars, what was the organizing force to bring the amino acids and the sugars together in a form which would be self-replicating? There had to be an organizing force. Let me talk about this little watch experiment. It's a thought experiment. It's not a real experiment. Let's take a Bulgari watch, very expensive, and let's take all of the components out of the watch. Let's put them into a flask, like the Stanley Miller flask. So here are all the components of a watch. And let's shake that flask. How many times would I have to shake the flask before I had a fully working Bulgari watch? I think you know the answer. It's not going to happen. It will never happen. And the reason it will never happen, theoretically, is because the laws of probability say that it will never happen. The statistics. It would take more than the age of the universe to bring that watch back together. What is needed is an organizing force, something that can create structure. So here we have a hydrothermal vent in the oceans. Hydrothermal vents have been around since the beginning of the Earth, or at least the beginning when we had water on the Earth. So Dario, would you please play the sound of the hydrothermal vent? So this sound, you wouldn't think that that sound would create structure. It's just noise, isn't it? It's a kind of rumbling noise. But what you don't know, perhaps, is that that rumbling sound actually contains a very broad range of frequencies. The other important point to note about hydrothermal vents is that they create bubbles. So you have gases coming up from the core of the Earth, or from the mantle. These gases create bubbles in the water. And the bubbles range in size from something the size of a melon right down to something that is so small you could not see it with your naked eye. Microscopic bubbles. And here we have a graphic. This is not... You see the bubble that has the pattern on it. Thanks to Photoshop. Okay, but the reality is that the sound from the hydrothermal vent will indeed create patterns on the surface of the bubble, of all of those bubbles. So now can you see where my thinking is going? We have an organizing force. Now you might be thinking, Photoshop. Well, this is not real. Anyone can do that with Photoshop once you learn the tools. But actually what I'm going to show you is that it is real. Thank you. Okay, so here I am in my laboratory with this instrument that I have developed. It's called cymoscope. You see, here is like a little, what looks like a little petri dish. In that petri dish, I inject water, very pure water, and then I excite that water with sound. And what happens is the sound, the periodicities of the sound are transposed to become periodicities in the water. In other words, we have made the sound visible. Now, every day, almost every day, not every day, but almost every day in my laboratory, I see forms in the water that resemble early life forms. Here you see a trilobite from the early Cambrian period, 526 million years ago. Sorry. So this cymatic trilobite very strongly resembles the actual trilobite, yes? Another day, I saw what looked like a starfish from the Ordovician era, 450 million years ago. Probably you didn't know that the starfish is so old a creature. Another day, I saw this, a diatom from the Jurassic period. Just look at the similarities. Another day, I saw this. In fact, if I had to show you those two images, and you did not know which one was the real fossil and which one was the cymatic fossil, or the cymatic image rather, you might choose the wrong one. You might have to guess. They're so similar. Only 65 million years ago. And look at this one. The same kind of idea. If you did not know that this image here was the real fossil and this one was created on the CymaScope instrument, you could be forgiven for choosing the wrong image. So my question to myself is this: how many of these kind of images, I could have shown you dozens and dozens of them, how many would I have to see before I would think there might be a connection between sound and life? And here's another comparison, very interesting. If you see this image here, this is the cross section of DNA. It has 10 nodal points and lots of other structures. So this is the cross section. This image here, of course, completely different scale, created on the CymaScope instrument. But look at the similarities. There are lots of similarities. Are these all coincidences? Or is there actually some form of organizing force that helped to structure early life? And we can ask this question, I think, quite reasonably now. If sound was involved in the creation of life, shouldn't sound have the power to heal life? Now let's move on a little bit to the physics of sound. Just a few little important thoughts that relate to cymatics. You are probably all taught at school, maybe even in university, that sound is a wave. How many of you were taught in school that sound was a wave? A show of hands, please. I think that's just about everyone. Sound is not a wave. Sound is not a wave. So why are we taught that sound is a wave? Well, the answer is very simple. You see this graph? It looks like a wave, yes? And indeed it is a wave. It's a sinusoidal wave. But what that is a graph of the actual shape of sound. The shape of sound is a bubble. All the sounds you can hear are shaped like a bubble. And what we've done here is to take a section through the bubble. We've halved the bubble so you can see inside the bubble. And can you see these little dotted lines here? They go from areas of high compression within the bubble to the top of the graph, and then these areas in between the shells go to the lower areas of pressure. So in other words, sound, all the sounds around you, the sounds coming out of my mouth now, are bubbles. It's expanding, of course, but it's a bubble. Where the wave comes in is that the bubble is oscillating in and out. And that is the wave. Now, it's a little bit of a misnomer. It's not really a wave. It's a bubble. So just keep that in your mind. The same thing is true of all light, all electromagnetic phenomena. They are all spherical, excepting laser light. Laser light, man-made light, is not spherical. But all natural light is spherical. Here is a graphic of a violinist, and you can see in this frozen moment in time this beautiful bubble emerging from the violin. Just think of the world around you now in a different way. All the sounds around you, you're having a conversation with someone, bubbles are coming out of their mouth, coming out of your mouth. You go outside, there's traffic, sound from a passing vehicle, there's a big bubble coming away from it. Now you're thinking in a different way. You're not thinking of something that's wiggling its way through the air. Think of it. Dario, could you please run this video? This is the cymoscope instrument shot from an angle. Wait, one moment. Okay, so what happened there was we're putting sound energy into the water. You increase the amplitude until a critical moment occurs. It's called the Faraday instability, after the famous English scientist Michael Faraday, because he did similar experiments to this hundreds of years ago, 200 years ago. So you saw a pattern forming on the surface of the water. But this pattern is not only on the surface of the water. The pattern is in the subsurface as well. Why? Because the sound in the subsurface organizes the molecules of the water. It compresses them. Okay? And whenever you get a compression of water molecules, the light that's coming down from above into the petri dish, the light reflects off a different refractive index. In other words, you have the body of the water, which is one refractive index, and then you have the compressed water caused by the sound, which has a different refractive index. And that is why, with the right lighting conditions, we can see sound in water. Now just think of the implications of this in your own body. Your body is filled with visceral water. There are ventricles in your brain that are filled with vesical water. Most of the cavities of your body are filled with vesical water. So now when you go outside and there's a passing truck going by and it's very loud, just think, the sound that's coming from that truck is actually imprinting itself in your visceral waters. Think of that. But not only in your visceral waters, also on the surface membrane of every cell in your body. Is this a hypothesis? Not exactly. Let me show you. But before we get to that point, let's talk a little bit about sound therapy or sound healing methods. The first one is, we're calling it constructive. This sound healing method is helping or supporting cells to a normal, healthy state. The other one is destructive. And this is destroying rogue cells or tumor masses or kidney stones, or you get the idea. Here you have a destructive method, and this is the medical procedure known as lithotripsy or lithotripsy. And this destroys, with very high levels of high-frequency sound, destroys things like gallbladder stones, kidney stones, things of that nature. This is a different method. This is using high-intensity focused ultrasound. Again, it's very high-frequency sound, but it's still sound. And they're using this very focused to pinpoint onto a mass, a tumor, and destroy the tumor. Slowly, of course. You cannot do it quickly. You have to do it over a period of time. Otherwise, the toxicity in the body becomes too great, and that would not be good for your body. But if you destroy the tumor mass slowly, then it can be a useful treatment for removing a tumor instead of a surgical procedure. Now, with this method, sonocytology, developed by Professor James Jimzeski, this carries the potential for both destructive and constructive sound therapy. There he is in his laboratory. So what does he do? He has a method that can listen to the sounds of the cells in your body. It's called atomic force microscopy. I'll not go into the details of how he achieves this, but he actually can listen to the sound of a living cell. Now, the potential for this is as follows. If you can listen to the sound of a living cell, let's say it's a sound of a tumor cell, you amplify the sound of that tumor cell, and then you send that sound back into the tumor, but much amplified. What's going to happen? Simple resonance. The tumor cell makes a very specific sonic signature. So if you send this sound much amplified back into that tumor mass is going to absorb those frequencies very, very efficiently. So efficiently that the cells will implode. They will be destroyed. That's a wonderful thought, that we could destroy a tumor cell with sound alone, or tumor cells with sound alone. However, because of simple resonance, there should be no collateral damage. Why? Because the cells around the tumor have a different song. They're not interested in the song of the tumor. So if you get the level of acoustic energy just right, you should be able to destroy the tumor without destroying the healthy cells. Which is a very exciting thought indeed. But I also mentioned the constructive method. Because if you can listen to the sound of a cell, a healthy cell, but one where the cell has become diseased, in the sense that some pathogen has come in and the cell does not like this pathogen, or maybe the cell has been traumatized by a physical injury. So the cell is alive, it's not dead, it's not replicating, it's just being. It's gone into a kind of sleep state. It's called the G0 stage. That cell can be awoken from the G0 phase and go into a G1 phase, which is the normal mitosis, the normal replication stage, simply by either, if you look at the medical literature, you give it rest, you give it good nutrition. That's what the medical literature says. But this other method, sonic method, is a kind of nutrition of a different kind. It's energy nutrition. Energy nutrition for the cells. And this is another aspect, a potential aspect of Jimzeski's work. Now we have a spectrum analysis that I'd like to share with you. This comes from Jimzeski's work. Jimzeski listened to the sound of a yeast cell, a healthy yeast cell, and then he put a little tiny drop of acid on the slide, on the microscope slide, very near to the cell. And what happened was amazing. The cell did not like it, obviously, and it sort of screamed, as you would perhaps if someone dropped acid on you. So Dario, if you could run this spectrum analyzer video, please. We have no sound. Thank you. So there is the spectrum of that healthy yeast cell. And now he puts the drop of acid on. We now get a different sound. Again, can we hear the sound? You can just hear it. But what's happened that's most interesting here, we have the same cell as before, but all of the frequencies of this cell have shifted several octaves up the bandwidth. So, whereas the profile was originally this, now you can see it shifted way up the band. Now, a long time ago, when I first heard about sound therapy, we're going back a long time now, but one of the ways it was explained in simplistic terms was that your body is like an orchestra. If you're healthy, all the players are playing in tune, but if you have an illness, one of your players is out of tune, and what you need to bring it back into tune is some of the right kind of sounds, and that will reharmonize your cells and bring it back to health. Well, I tell you, this sounded very simplistic to me, and too simplistic, and I actually did not trust that model. I thought, sounds a little bit too simple to me. But actually, it's correct, because here you saw what happened. You had the original profile of the cell, and when the cell was traumatized, all the frequencies shifted to higher octaves. So to encourage that cell to come back into a normal, healthy state, we would obviously give that cell sonic nutrition of a sound kind that will help to support it back to a normal, healthy state. Now, one thing that's very important that I discovered, and it came to me after many years after the Great Pyramid experiment, that perhaps the key factor in healing my lower back condition was the very first experiment I did in the Great Pyramid, which was the white noise. So, to erase a dissonant pattern in a cell, the hypothesis is that if you add white noise, which is all frequencies of sound, theoretically, that they will, like a blanket, they will erase what is there in terms of sound frequencies. Very much like the old kind of tape recorders. Do you remember when you made a recording, and if you wanted to erase what was on the tape, then you would use a bulk eraser, or you would simply press a button that said erase, but essentially you're erasing the data on the tape to replace it with new data. Well, a similar kind of process as that, where you use, in this case, broadband noise to support the erasure of an unhealthy sound pattern. So getting back to the Great Pyramid and the pain in my back, I really believe that the sound that actually removed the pain in my lower back was white noise, the white noise experiment that I performed. I say that because, if you remember, the pain did not come back after I left the pyramid. The first experiment I conducted before the cymatic experiment was a white noise test, and then only a few minutes after making sound in the sarcophagus, I noticed all the pain in my back had left me. So logically, I think it had to be the white noise that removed the pain. Here's another video. My lovely wife Annalise and I went out to a local waterfall one day with an ultrasound meter. Dario, if you would run this, please. So here's the sound of the waterfall. I adjust the sensitivity of the meter. Can you see these dots here? This is showing very high levels of ultrasound. Thank you, Dario. The same is true of the ocean. We also took a video at the ocean. If you walk by the ocean, if you walk by a big waterfall, you will be being bathed not only by white noise, which I just told you is almost certainly the healing component from the Great Pyramid, but also ultrasound, which is also known to be healing. Now, if there are some of you in the audience who are sound therapists, you might be thinking, well, what about the instruments that I use? What about gongs? What about Tibetan bowls? And so on. Different instruments have different spectrums of sound. Well, it's certainly true that gongs produce a kind of noise. It's a kind of musical noise. And so do Tibetan bowls. They also create a musical noise. So remember that no one actually understands, truly, no one understands how sound triggers the healing response of the human body. No one knows that. So some of what I'm sharing here is hypothesis, and some of what I'm sharing is actually good science, as you will see in a moment. So they are making gongs in Tibet. They've been making them in Tibet for 1,000 years. And by the way, thinking of Stuart Mitchell again, you know the Roslin cubes, if any of you know about the Roslin cubes, this music that's been embedded in stone, well, it just so happens that the designer of Roslin traveled to Cathay, which is now modern-day Tibet, where they have been making gongs for 1,000 years. And how do they tune the gongs? They sprinkle sand on the gong, and then they make the sound of the gong and see what pattern forms. The second sound healing component is supporting cells with frequencies that support the cell to return to normal function, as I have already explained. And there are many modalities, many manufacturers now creating these kind of sound instruments. Here's a very good example from the USA, a company called Thyma Technologies, and they produce this instrument that you use. This is the applicator. This is the applicator that creates the sound, and here you type in a particular protocol, and you give sound to yourself, or you give sound to a client or a therapist, to a patient. And here are three of the sounds from that instrument made visible. Dario, if you would run the video, please. Now, I want you to imagine, as you watch, there's only three sounds here. I want you to imagine that these patterns that you're seeing are actually forming around every cell in your body, or wherever the sound is applied. An important one. This is interesting because the sound creates a kind of massaging effect. So if you can visualize those sound patterns literally massaging the traumatized cells in your back or wherever you have a muscle injury. Thank you. Now, I mentioned earlier that some of this is hypothetical, some of it is real. I just want to show you now that I actually do work in my laboratory with a microscope, and I've developed this method of actually imaging sound at the cellular level. So the first experiments I did were with what we call sessile drops. These are little tiny microscopic or semi-microscopic drops of water. Dario, if you would run this video, please. So this little drop of water is less than the size of a grain of salt. It's a single frequency. Increasing the amplitude, and you see you get this very pretty pattern. Change the frequency, and the pattern changes. Revert to the original frequency, and the pattern reforms. Following that work, I then did some work with the aloe vera plant, which I'm sure you all know it has many healing properties. And so if you run this video, please, Dario. This is on the surface membrane of the aloe vera plant. Some of you might see it looks like people holding hands. Here, little people holding hands. Thank you. And the next series of experiments that I'm going to do in the lab with the microscope are to image sounds on the surface of human cells, my own cells. I want you to imagine now, here's a pattern, a musical pattern, generated on the microscope. So, sorry, I beg your pardon, on the cymoscope. I want you to imagine now that these kind of patterns from music. Imagine Stuart's wonderful concert last evening. I know that Annalise and I were in tears because we were so full of emotion from that beautiful music. But also, I was also visualizing every cell in my body being surrounded by these absolutely beautiful patterns being created by Stuart's music. And this is, we're coming very close to the end now. How does sound heal? So this is the hypothesis. Every cell has thousands of these little cell receptors, they're called, on the surface membrane of the cell. This is the way that the cells receive information, receive food, expel waste products, and so on. And as I said earlier, when a cell is traumatized, for whatever reason, it goes to sleep. And medical doctors call this an illness. Some system of the body is not operating correctly. So hypothetically, to bring the cell back to normal health, you inject sonic frequencies, and they massage the cell receptors around the cell and wake the cell up. Oh, I've been asleep and now I'm awake. And when I'm awake, I will do what a cell is meant to do, which is to replicate. The third and final component of sound healing is the infrared component. Every sound you make creates infrared light. You remember, in the beginning was the Word, and then came the light separately. And this is because wherever you have friction, you have light. In this case, with sound, it's infrared light. So as I'm speaking now, imagine the sound bubble coming out of my mouth, but also imagine a light bubble coming out of my mouth. And it's very simple. Every molecule of air, every molecule in the air, when it strikes another molecule of air, creates friction. And that friction creates heat. And heat is just another name for light. So let's do a very quick experiment now, very quick. I'd like you all to rub your hands together very, very quickly, fast and hard. You're feeling heat, right? Now, stop and put your hands over your eyes. Can you feel that warmth? Beautiful warmth. So what did we do? The molecules in one hand were rubbing past the molecules of the other hand. You heard a sound, the sound of rubbing. You felt heat. Heat is just another name for light. So what's happening now as I'm speaking? A sound bubble is coming out of my mouth at the speed of sound, and a light bubble is coming out of my mouth at the speed of light. So going back to the sound therapy instrument, when you put sound into a patient or a client, you're not only putting sound in, you're putting infrared light in as well. And the infrared light is modulated by the sound. Well, that was the little test that we just... And also, very important, final slide, and that is to say that all of the cells in your body communicate in the infrared spectrum. They share information. Many papers in the medical literature to support this. So, infrared light is almost certainly an important component of sound. Thank you very much indeed.
Ora avete capito perché sponsorizzavo tanto l'arrivo di John in Italia. Guardate che lavoro affascinante, profondo che fa. Siete felici? Bello, fategli un grandissimo applauso, perché è una persona meravigliosa, dolce, grande, serio, professionale, di una grande sensibilità e una grande preparazione tecnica. Sì? Do you have a CD with this kind of sounds?
No,
Allora, non vendiamo CD con i suoni di cellulari. Però se volete potete andare sul sito internet, c'è anche una sorta di shop online. Ci sono alcune cose che noi per esempio possiamo vendere che ci danno la possibilità di rendere la nostra voce in suono. E diciamo tutto ciò che noi ricaviamo serve per sostenere la ricerca.